All right, so you have joined us for best practices in writing instruction. I am looking forward to sharing with you what the experts say really works with kids, and what helps kids become better readers is more writing. And that's really the foundation of this presentation. Before we get started, I'd love for you to make sure you have pencil and paper handy for this. So if you need just 30 seconds to run and grab something to write with and some paper, that would be wonderful.
While people are doing that, Patty, I'll put the Wakelet in the chat.
Super, that's great. So I have put together a collection of resources that really helped me put this presentation together that I think you might find helpful. So Pixita is just pasting those in the chat, and you can actually, it's one link. It's a Wakelet collection. A Wakelet is a great online tool. It's free. You don't have to have an account to have access to these things. All you have to do is grab that link, click on it, and it will have links to everything that I reference in this presentation. It's nice to have it in one tidy package. Okay, so hopefully everybody grabs something to write with and a piece of paper, and we'll get started. So I have been teaching at Buffalo State since 2013, and this is just some of the classes that I teach, the ones that I've been teaching most recently, EDU 211, Intro to Literacy, 311, Reading and the Other Language Arts in the Elementary School, 535, which is Teaching Writing, Birth through Grade 12, 612, Developing Literacy through Literature, and 643, Teaching Strategies for Reading and Writing Intervention. The last three courses on this list are in our Graduate Literacy Specialist program. I too am a certified literacy specialist, a former classroom teacher. I taught second, third, and fourth grade for a number of years. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I'm a mom of 3 college-age kids. And I bring that up because I feel like I learned the most about teaching kids to read and write by watching my own kids develop as readers and writers. So I'm happy to share what I know with you today. And again, the Wakelet collection, you can access that for all the resources I used to compile today's presentation. So I would like to just give a nod here to PDS for helping us frame our conversation this year and putting the emphasis on acceleration and not loss, not the deficit model. You know, these are challenging times for educators. Teachers have done amazing work over the past 18 months. And it's difficult, I think. Sometimes we think about what kids have missed out on, but it's kind of, you know, not really good for us to focus on that. I think what we need to do is really look at where kids are right now and just do what we do best and take them to where they need to go. And so again, I just want to thank PDS for helping us frame this conversation. And it was great to look through this book, read this book this summer, Rebound by Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry, because they too said we really need to emphasize writing in the upcoming year with kids. So my goals today are to help you gain an understanding of the importance of writing instruction in a comprehensive literacy program, to learn how reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So that means reading helps writing and writing helps reading. And I'll show you how that works. And then most specifically, to give you best practices to implement in your classroom. Whenever I do professional development, I like my audience to have things that they can use right away. So no matter whether you're a student who's just starting to write lesson plans or a student teacher or a practicing teacher, you know, there's something here for everybody that you'll be able to implement, like I said, right away. So I'd love if you could just type in the chat one word to describe your current role. Are you a student teacher, an administrator, a professor? Or if you have another word to describe yourself, that would be great. And it will help me kind of understand where everyone's coming from, but it will help you to know the audience. Great. I love the person Rebecca wrote, teacher with an exclamation point. That's excellent. Super. All right, so it looks like we have quite an array, and that's wonderful. All right, then the next thing I'd love you to do, rather than give me a fist, type a number in the chat to describe what you think is your knowledge of writing instruction, if you were to rate that. So 5, I completely understand it and can teach it. I mostly understand it, that would be a 4. 3, I understand it pretty well. 2, I need more practice and examples. 1, I need help. And 0, I don't understand at all. And I will not pass any judgment at all. Okay, excellent. So as I said, there's something here for everybody to get today, regardless of your knowledge level. All right, and then one more thing for now to type in the chat. What do you hope to learn in today's session? What brought you here? Great, Michelle. Strategies for struggling students. Emily says strategies. Oh, fostering a love in writing. That's a great one. Just give you a few more seconds. Extend your knowledge, learn strategies. Great. Okay, you come to the right place. All right, so going back to the Rebound book by Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and colleagues. I wanted to quote something that I read in the book that really struck me as I was looking at it through a writing teacher's lens. And they said, one area of the curriculum that's likely to require a more significant investment is writing. Students need to write more and receive feedback about their writing, which has been especially difficult during COVID teaching. They go on to say, writing is an area that likely needs more attention. It seems that writing volume has declined during distance learning and that writing was less likely to be the focus of instruction. And I get it. I know we were all just doing the best that we could for sure, really over the past year and a half. And I think teachers mostly were focused on what they thought was most important with kids, and that's understandable. So why do you think writing suffered during COVID teaching? If you can just type it in the chat, if you think you have an idea, and even if you don't have firsthand knowledge, if you have a little bit of a hypothesis as to why that might be the case, I'd love to have you share that. Difficulty detecting plagiarism. Difficult to do at long distance and when students were hybrid. Using the writing process remotely. Yep, tricky to kind of navigate that with the technology. Difficult for kids to work with peers. Yeah, that's an important part of writing, having them work with a peer to give them feedback. So motivation could have gone down because they're not getting feedback on the spot. Definitely. Yeah, so quite a few issues, I think, made it difficult to teach writing remotely, less one-on-one time. Just the simple logistics of having a child share their work with you, and the difficulty with maybe having them write on the with the technology, but not with pencil and paper. And if they did, how did they share that work with you? So it definitely was tricky. Okay, thanks for sharing. Unfortunately, even pre-COVID, writing instruction has suffered in schools. There's a great question and answer interview done with Dr. Steve Graham, and I'm going to be referencing him throughout this entire presentation. He is a renowned expert and researcher in writing instruction. And he was asked, what is the state of writing instruction in schools currently? Again, pre-COVID. And he said, there's very little writing going on by kids that involves extended writing about things they're learning or things that they're reading. And there's very little instruction and writing going on, period. Now, I hesitate to say that because I know so many great writing teachers, and I'm sure many of you do too, or you're a great writing teacher yourself. But I do think there's some reluctance to teach kids to write. Maybe teachers aren't comfortable. Maybe they feel like they didn't get enough preparation or enough staff development in writing. And sometimes writing just kind of takes a back burner because people think that focusing on reading is more important. But I'm here to say that we're doing a disservice to children when we put writing in, on the back burner, because the more kids write, the better they become at reading. And the more kids read, the better they become at writing, that reciprocal process that I referred to earlier. So why should you spend time on writing instruction? Dr. Timothy Shanahan, another expert in reading and writing instruction and researcher, says a major purpose for teaching writing is its strong impact on reading achievement. So they've done studies that have shown, significant growth in kids when they are given more time to write and more instruction in writing. Reading and writing draw upon the same body of knowledge and skills. So I'd like you to just look at the visual I have on the right. You might recognize that they call those the Big Five, as determined by the National Reading Panel. And that panel convened and came up with the conclusion that these, based on research, were the areas that we really needed to focus on to teach kids to be proficient readers. We needed to build phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, fluency, and vocabulary. So let's think for a minute about writing. When kids write and they listen to the sounds and words, is that phonemic awareness? It definitely is. When they're actually putting those words on paper, transcribing those sounds that they hear, that's phonics. They need to consider their audience kids when they're reading to make sure their piece makes sense. And also they need to think about the text structure and choose an appropriate text structure when they're writing their piece, and that's comprehension. When they make sure that their sentences flow and use things like punctuation, like a comma or a period to indicate a pause needs to take place, that's fluency. And then word choice, thinking about word choice like specific nouns or descriptive adjectives, that is vocabulary. So writing gives kids a context to practice and strengthen all of these areas that are related to reading instruction. I promise this is the only time I'll put a really long quote up, but I couldn't leave anything out because it's so good. So Dr. Timothy Shanahan, which I mentioned earlier, has a blog that's fabulous. It's one of my favorite blogs to read because he really makes me think. It's called Shanahan on Literacy. And in my Wakelet collection, I've pinned a few of his blog posts. You should be able to find that quite easily. But this post was called, "What is the Science of Reading?" And he says, phonics is certainly an important part of the science of reading, but it's not the whole thing. Any real science of reading would include all methods or approaches that have been found through research to give kids a learning advantage in reading. That means oral reading fluency instruction should be a part of the science of reading, and vocabulary and morphology teaching too. There are also a number of instructional approaches that have been found to boost reading comprehension by teaching thinking strategies or enhancing written language performance, cohesion, sentence combining, reducing, etc. And guiding kids to write about text is scientific as well. So there is that nod to writing and how they really believe writing is the missing piece of the puzzle when we talk about the science of reading. Dr. Shanahan has been interviewed several times about the National Reading Panel because he was a member of the panel, and said that if they were to revisit that, they would look more deeply at writing. So I'm here to say writing is really an important part of a comprehensive literacy program. Dr. Steve Graham and his colleague Michael Hebert carried out a meta-analysis of more than 100 studies in which students wrote about text, and they found that writing in various ways about what one had read improved comprehension and learning, and it did so better than reading alone, reading and rereading, or reading and discussing. So a lot of deep thinking goes on when kids have to write about what they read, and the research proves that it helps their comprehension. So as I was putting this presentation together, I certainly looked at the research, and then I looked at the experts in the field too, the practitioners. So as I mentioned, Dr. Graham and Dr. Shanahan. Dr. Steve Graham actually is the author of several documents. You can access them through my Wakelet collection that were funded by the Carnegie Corporation. So Writing Next, Writing to Read, and Informing Writing. And they are summaries of these meta-analyses that he conducted. where he looked at all the research and determined what the best practices were for writing instruction based on this research. The What Works Clearinghouse too has some great documents authored by Steve Graham and some other writers as well. So one for elementary students and one for secondary, and then some books that Dr. Graham and also Dr. Shanahan contributed to: the Handbook of Writing Research and Best Practices in Writing Instruction. But I also, as I said, looked at what the practitioners had to say. And on the left is my stack, my personal stack of some of my writing books. And it's not comprehensive. I have many more than this, but these are the ones I'm combing through right now. And I made a little word cloud of the experts that I really pulled from to put this together. And I won't say too much more about the research. I do really want to focus on practice because I know that, you are here today to learn specific strategies.
Patty, Kelsey made a comment in the chat.
Okay, let me see there. Thank you for monitoring that. I feel like writing also slows thought down and students can choose their words more carefully. I always write essays and then type them because of this. Okay. Yeah, so it can slow their thoughts down. It can be a little bit of an encumbrance for kids because their hand doesn't work as quickly as their mind is thinking. Oh, and I see you're saying you write the essay and then type them. Is that what you do? That's your method? Yeah, so I think we need to give kids a variety of strategies for sure. Some might do better with actually typing, but that might be an encumbrance for some kids because they're not good at keyboarding. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more in the presentation, but thanks for sharing that. All right, so I only have a couple of videos I'm going to share with you today, but seeing I talked so much about Dr. Graham, I'm going to just kind of show this 2-minute video where he talks about what we can do as teachers to help kids become better writers. And then I'm going to dig deeper into what he says.
My colleagues and I have conducted a number of meta-analyses trying to identify what are effective practices for young children. And a couple of things have come up as being absolutely necessary. One is kids have to write, first and foremost. Second, we need to teach them how to carry out the processes of planning, revising, evaluating, and monitoring as they're writing. Second, we need to make sure that they're knowledgeable about the basic characteristics of the genres in which they write. And we also need to be certain that they develop the particular fundamental writing skills so that they're automatic, like handwriting, spelling, typing, but also that they become facile in terms of their ability to put their ideas into sentences. And so that's absolutely necessary that kids learn to do that. In addition, there's a number of things that we can do to support young writers. One is helping them set goals for what they're going to write about. Second is to have them work together with each other around process as they plan, they draft, they revise. Third is to give them feedback about their writing and help them assess their own writing and give feedback to others. Another thing that's very important in terms of thinking about this is using 21st century tools. When kids use word processing over 6 months or a year, their development as a writer is much greater than when they just write by hand. And then finally, not part of our meta-analysis, but in terms of our analysis of teachers who are really fabulous expert literacy teachers, one of the things that we find consistent in terms of what they do is they set up a classroom that's supportive, that's pleasant, and that helps kids develop over time as a writer. I think those are the things that we found that are most critical.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So Dr. Graham gave us a lot of information in that, and I tried to kind of boil it down to the essential best practices that you can utilize. And so here's the list, and then I'm going to dig deeper into each one. Increase the how much time students spend writing. There's actually a study that's been done that says that when kids are given 45 minutes more a week to write, 45 minutes more time writing, it improves their comprehension. So sometimes we can just make small changes. Have students write about the text they read, provide feedback, study models, teach critical skills, processes, and knowledge associated with writing, adopt a strategic approach to teaching writing, and use 21st century tools. And I'll get into each one of those. All right, so whenever you see these beautiful colored pencils, it'll be one of these best practices. It'll be a reminder for you that I'm sharing a new one with you. So number one, increase how much students write. Sounds easy, but can be a little bit tricky. So how can we do that? Certainly as teachers, we love to do things like writer's workshop in the classroom, but there's ways that we can kind of infuse it into the curriculum in other areas. So simple things like an entrance ticket or a ticket out the door are simple ways for kids to practice their writing skills. Quick writes. So sometimes, not everything has to be a long essay. It could just be a few sentences where kids kind of stop and jot and share what they've learned. Summaries are really helpful, not just summaries of what you read, but let's pause and think about what you just learned and see if you can put it into your own words. A reading response journal, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but I'm a big fan of those because I think they really establish the reading-writing connection. A writer's notebook where kids might be putting just little seed ideas. Something comes to mind and they write a little blurb about it, and then they might develop those pieces further in the writer's workshop. And then I'm a big fan of having kids write in the content areas. So I want to share two quick little strategies with you. Don't know if you've ever heard this one before, but I love it. It's 3-2-1. And I've seen many different variations of this, but just having kids maybe at the end of a lesson write 3 things they learned, 2 things they found interesting, and 1 question they have. And so you can Google it and just find a lot of different graphic organizers for the 3-2-1, and they might have different prompts too. You can even make your own. But if you check out the Teacher Toolkit, it's a great website that has a lot of engagement strategies like this and involve writing. And again, I link to this in Wakelet, but you can just type in your search engine, Teacher Toolkit, the Teacher Toolkit, and it will take you directly there. There's videos that show you how these strategies work, and then downloadable forms that you can use, for these particular graphic organizers. So I love that one for infusing more writing into the content areas. I also really like this one. It's called Triangle, Square, Circle. So the triangle is signifying the 3 points, right? 3 significant things that you took away from the lesson. What concepts from the lesson are squared away in your mind or really square with you? I've seen that too. And then the circle, what's still circling around in your head, right? 1 or 2 questions. So when we get kids in lessons, in the content areas to stop and put some of these things down in writing, it really not only helps them understand what they've learned, but it brings questions to the surface that we as teachers might need to address with our students and go back and reteach. So Teacher Toolkit, that's a great place to look for more ideas. All right, so certainly my techniques that I'm sharing after each best practice are not exhaustive. There's so much more you can do, but we'll go into it deeper in the follow-up sessions, but hopefully this is enough so that you'll be able to take away a few things that you can try with your students. Number 2, have students write about the text they read. So Dr. Graham talked about that in the video. My favorite way to do this is the reading response journal. When I was a classroom teacher, that was a big part of my program, was having my students write in this. And I love this example, just a marble notebook and a little sheet glued in the front with journal questions or prompts for kids, because you might have them read a chapter and write about it, but they might not be exactly sure how to respond. So on one of my follow-up sessions, we'll get deeper into the reading response journal, but I want to share some techniques with you that you can use. This is a fabulous book, Reading with Presence, Crafting Mindful Evidence-Based Reading Responses. I just read this summer, and this author, Marilyn Pryl, talks about the Reader Response Journal. It's more geared towards upper grades, maybe 6 through 12, but certainly could probably be modified to use with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. But she does state that writing about reading increases comprehension, and that responses can be very brief. Prompts can really help kids. So just like the previous slide that showed you a reader response journal with some prompts, this book suggests a lot of great ones. And then provide choices when possible. I'm big on choice in writing because I think the research tells us it really increases motivation to write. So whenever we can give kids the opportunity to write about maybe what they're connecting with or what questions they had, rather than just giving them a prompt, I think that their writing quality increases significantly. And I love the little formula in the book that they share. It's over in that box on the right. And so Marilyn says, use an original thought in your response. Don't just summarize. Then pick a quote from the text and say what page you found it on, and then expand upon that. Write at least 5 complete sentences. So I think that's a great way to get kids in the upper grades going with these reading response journals. There's a link here on the bottom, and I put it in the Wakelet collection. Another take on reading response journals is to just have kids always write a letter to the author. So you read a chapter, now you're going to write a letter to the author. So you could write what you noticed about the setting of the book, or one of the most memorable things, or what the text reminded you of. And so that's just an interesting take on the reader response journal, to have kids actually write letters to the author. And I want to say that reading response journals can be used with kids of all ages. And I love this example from a kindergarten student. The teacher put a little prompt at the top: can you make a personal connection to Junie B. Jones? And the student says, I got on my papa's back like Junie B. Jones does, a little illustration right next to it. So even in the early grades, kids can do things like draw an illustration or label something that's a response to what they're reading. Upper grades for sure. I love the one on the left. It has Post-it notes. So this particular student did, as they were reading, stop and jot, that strategy. So as things kind of struck the student while they were reading, they did that and then moved the Post-its over to the reading response log and expanded on those ideas. And I love the one with the illustration and the words that just shows, we can be creative, or allow our students to be creative with their responses. All right, the next best practice, number 3, provide feedback. And that was really tough to do in COVID teaching. I wanted to emphasize that it's important to think about giving kids feedback through all stages of the writing process. Sometimes we just do it after they're done with the draft and conference with kids, but sometimes they get stuck in the pre-writing phase. So let's be mindful of that we can give kids feedback at any point during the writing process. And that the feedback can be not only from the teacher, but from their peers. I do remember in my classroom having my students sit in a circle, an author's circle, and they would read their pieces to one another. And some of them, they gave each other the best feedback, things that I wouldn't even think of. So I did want to underscore the importance of peer-to-peer feedback. And then that feedback can take different forms. It can be written feedback on papers, conferences where you meet one-on-one or in small groups with kids. And during COVID teaching, I did audio and video feedback with my students a lot. When they were writing lesson plans, I would jump into Screencastify. It could be another screencast piece of software, but I would put the document up and speak to my students and point to things. And I found just like the tone of my voice, some things would be missing in my written comments, but when they heard my voice, they picked up on so many other things. And I'll tell you, they were so grateful to get a little video link to that feedback that I was providing. So we often talk amongst ourselves, my colleagues and I, Fixita, you'll smile at this one. We say COVID keepers. To me, that's a COVID keeper, is finding opportunities to provide audio or video feedback for kids when we can't always get to everybody in the classroom. Okay, I love this suggestion. Best practice number 4, study models. The research supports this as well. So Kelly Gallagher has authored several books about reading and writing instruction. He's a high school teacher in California. I don't know if any of you have read any of his books, but he's great. And he says in this book, which is In the Best Interests of Students, Staying True to What Works in the ELA Classroom, make sure we provide our students with plenty of opportunities to stand next to worthy models of reading and writing. Amongst all the noise currently surrounding the new standards and testing, let's not forget that building better readers and writers often begins with finding good models for our students to emulate. So I love that. And I wish I could bring Kelly Gallagher here right to talk to us, but I'm going to actually show you a little video so that you can hear a little bit more about what he has to say about the use of models. All right, here we go.
I think there's a real big difference between assigning writing and teaching of writing. And if we're going to be effective teachers of writing, I think it all starts with modeling. When I coached high school basketball and I had a kid who had a funky shot or shot a knuckleball, I wouldn't just yell at him, put backspin on the ball. I would say to him, please come stand next to me. Now, watch me as I hold the ball in my hand. Watch how I spin it out of my hand. Watch this, watch this, watch this. And then hand him the ball and say, now you go. And that's how we learn. We stand next to somebody who already knows how to do it. And we observe carefully. I'm mindful of Writing Next, which is the most comprehensive study of secondary writing done in the last 25 years. And it's a meta-analysis of over 100 studies. And they looked at what works. And one of the central tenets of that study is that kids need models, models, models. I don't care if you're learning how to wait tables or you're learning how to repair a refrigerator. The way you learn how to do that is you stand next to somebody who knows how to do it, and then you study that person, and then you emulate that person. And so right like this, what I've done is I've put my kids next to people who know how to write in the various real-world discourses, and we pay close attention to what professional writers do, and then we emulate them. And the kids pay close attention to what I do, and then they emulate me. I think kids need both levels of modeling. They need to stand next to professional writers, and they also need to stand next to the best teacher the best writer in the room, the teacher.
Okay.
I know this idea of actually standing in.
Sorry about that. All right, back to the PowerPoint. So I think he speaks so eloquently about the importance of models, and I love that real world example. When you think about it, kids always need someone to stand next to them and show them how to do it. And that's, I think, what we need to do as writing teachers is give kids models, show them one, have them, sidle right up to a model that we have right next to them on the desk so that they can see how somebody else does it. It also involves having conversations and noticing what good writers do. So to kind of illustrate my point, we're going to do something fun right now. I had you go get a piece of paper. I'd love for you, if you haven't done so, grab something. And I'd love you to fold your piece of paper in half, just like this picture. And I would like you to, on one side, the first half, draw a cockapoo the best you can. Now, please don't Google it. I don't want you to look at any pictures or figure out what it is, but just do your best and draw a cockapoo. And I'll just give you a little bit of time to do that, maybe 2 minutes. All right. So I can't really see any of you, but I bet you did wonderful drawing. So I'll just assume that they're great. Now I'm going to make your life a little bit easier. Oh, some are showing. Oh, wow, Kelsey, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. All right. Now on the other side, I'd like you to draw a cockapoo using this model. Okay, just a few more seconds. Oh, Kelsey, thank you. Wow, the first one was great, but that's even better. Wonderful. Okay, so I think you get the idea. And the reason I wanted you to do this activity is I think it's great for teaching kids the why. Okay, Dr. Fisher actually talked about this in the presentation last week about teaching kids the why of what we're having them do. And so this is the why with models because it really does improve their understanding of what our expectations are. And so I don't know if any of you, when I said draw a cockapoo, drew a dog, but I think some kids would draw the dog, a cockapoo, spelled differently. And so this, I think, really speaks to the importance of how a model can clarify what our expectations are. And we do that with writing too. We put a piece of writing up in front of kids, we have them look at it, talk about it, analyze it, and then try to emulate it. Okay, so there's all sorts of different types of models like children's literature or young adult literature, teacher created models. Kelly Gallagher talked about that, about the teacher being the best writer in the room, student writing. So you might want to spotlight if you ask a student for permission, if you can use their piece as a model. Generally they're really excited about that and honored, but we certainly want to always ask kids first. And then other texts like essays, newspaper articles, they make great models, and even giving kids a copy and having them like highlighting the opening sentence, or if it's an opinion piece, let's look for the opinion or the argument and then like everything that backs up that claim, and have them use their highlighter to find those things, really dissecting and analyzing those models so that kids can then use that in their own writing to make their own pieces stronger. I love using picture books with kids of all ages, even older students. So here's an example, Pam Munoz Ryan, her book, Hello Ocean, one of my favorites, such a beautifully descriptive book about the beach. And look at one page, squishy, sandy, soggy ground, slippery seaweed that wraps around. What a beautiful page to show what alliteration is all about. And so then having kids kind of dabble in this technique, maybe in their writer's notebook. They don't have to do a long essay, but maybe they just write a few sentences to practice alliteration. And then the idea being when they write a longer piece, they might sprinkle a craft technique like this into it. And another one of my favorites, I love Cynthia Rylant, one of my favorite authors. Her book In November is beautiful. This page has personification and similes. In November, the trees are standing all sticks and bones without their leaves. How lovely they are, spreading their arms like dancers. They know it's time to be still. So even after reading the book, just to enjoy the story, then going back and reading like a writer. Katie Wood Ray, who's an expert in the field, talks about that. We often just teach kids to read like readers, but teaching them to read like a writer with a writer's eye, to kind of notice what an author is doing and say, I kind of like that. I'm going to try that in my own writing. And so I'm a big fan of reading the book once and then going back and reading like a writer and maybe zooming in on a few pages to notice the craft techniques the author is using, and then sending kids out to try to do a little quick write and experiment and see if they can do it on their own. So teacher models, back to that whole concept. And we're going to dig deeper into this in one of the follow-up sessions, but I actually wrote those models and I've used this with teaching students with second graders. Not only are these pieces that I wrote, but this is a visual rubric. Sometimes when we give kids a rubric for writing, there's so much verbiage on it, they can't really understand what it is you're expecting of them. But how powerful this visual is, where they can see what a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4 are. So having an anchor chart like this in your classroom, but really talking to your kids about these pieces, like what's the difference between the 1 and the 2 or the 3 and the 4? And not everybody will be at the point of a 4, but certainly we can give our kids the opportunity to strive for that. And I have found in sharing this strategy and actually using it with students in the classroom, the quality of their writing goes up tremendously because they get it, they can see it. Okay, so that's a little bit about models, but more to come in the follow-up sessions if you're interested in that. Tip number 5, teach critical skills, processes, and knowledge associated with writing instruction. And these are just a few. This is a list that's not even exhaustive, but things like handwriting, spelling, and word processing are important to teach kids. Sentence construction, things related to process like planning, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. Genres such as opinion, informational, narrative, both personal and fictional narrative. Text structures like main idea, detail, cause and effect, problem, solution, sequence, and compare, contrast. The attributes of good writing, that good writing has ideas and sentence fluency and word choice and voice and organization and conventions. Many people refer to those as the traits of writing. And then craft, like similes and metaphor and alliteration and onomatopoeia and strong verbs and descriptive adjectives, etc. So there's a lot that we need to teach kids about writing. I feel like the mini lesson section of the writer's workshop is the perfect context to show kids what these things are, to model them through the mini lesson, and then to have them go out and try it. Okay. I want to share one idea that I really love, and it's something called the kernel essay. To read more about it, you can visit the website on the bottom. It's called trailofbreadcrumbs.net. And the site is run by someone named Gretchen Burnaby. She's written quite a few books on how to teach kids how to write. And so this technique is really wonderful. It allows kids to, up in the top boxes that go across the page horizontally, come up with a structure for their essay and then write one sentence for each box to see if they have enough to say about a particular topic. And if they do, if they're able to fill out the boxes on the top and the sentences that correspond beneath, then perhaps they would develop that into a more comprehensive essay. So let's look at an example. This student picked the structure, my prized possession. I just couldn't do without. It has the most. It has, before I had it, that's why, without it, I would. And so this student said their prized possession is a cat. And she wrote, I just couldn't do without my cats because they keep me company. They're fun and playful. One is named Gizmo and another one's Snowball. Before I had them, my life was boring. If I had no cats, I would be bored and not have anyone to play with. Without my cats, I would have no company. So she veered a little bit from the structure, but the basic idea is there. And this student, Mallory, filled this out and decided, yes, I have enough to say about this. And then you can expand on each one of these sentences and provide a little bit more detail. If you visit that Trail of Breadcrumbs website, there are all these free downloadable resources for teachers. There's one PDF that's a 22-page packet. I put it in the Wakelet collection with all these different structures for essays. So following a path, where I started out in life, where I found myself, where I am now, where I might be in the future. I love the box of chocolates, what happened, what you expected to get, what you really got, and how you reacted. That's such a creative way to write an essay. And then the prized possession was the one that Mallory did. And just a little side note about this, for years, I've heard teachers say, oh, that 5-paragraph essay, the hamburger graphic organizer that we all use. I mean, it's certainly a fine place to start, having kids have an intro, a body, and a conclusion. But teachers would say that kids kind of get in a rut. They always use that, and it kind of stifles their creativity, and that they really need to kind of come up with other ways to maybe write an essay. To me, this is the answer. Look at all these different structures. Each one of those boxes could represent a sentence for young kids, but older kids, each box could represent a separate paragraph in their essay that they elaborate on. On that Trail of Breadcrumbs site, there are also ones for the content areas, social studies, science, math. So you definitely want to check that out. And I'm going to dig deeper into kernel essays in a follow-up session. Okay, 2 more tips to share. Adopt a strategic approach to teaching writing. I'm a big fan of teaching strategies to kids. I think it's really important for kids to have a lot of strategies in their cognitive toolbox. And so this draws upon the work of Paris and colleagues. And they say that to know how to use something strategically, we have to have 3 types of knowledge: declarative, procedural, and conditional. Declarative is knowledge that something exists, like a writing strategy. Procedural is how to use it, the procedure, and conditional is when to use it. So the idea being, in this example, might clarify for you, here's a web about what dogs do during playtime. If you are a dog owner, you might recognize Kongs and obstacle courses and fetch and toys and tug of war, etc. So important to teach kids that webbing is a strategy we use, but we don't just want to say, oh, here's this thing called a web. We want to teach students that there is this strategy called a web. That's declarative knowledge. We also want to show them how to use it. So modeling explicitly for them on chart paper, wherever you do it in the classroom, but also when to use it. It's really helpful during the planning phase of writing to generate ideas and to help us have somewhat of an organizational structure. And then I would even add the why that Dr. Fisher talked about last week. The why is important too, to really motivate kids. And we want to tell them, you use this because sometimes we get a little writer's block. I know I do. And a web really is a technique or strategy that I use to help me. So not just throwing a web up there and say, hey, here's a web, use it, but making sure that we integrate declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge into our teaching. And that's what really helps kids be strategic. We want them to pull out a piece of paper and say, I'm having a little trouble. I think I'm going to pull that tool out of my toolbox called a web and use that to get me going, so that they're sort of self-regulated learners. And then my 7th and final recommendation is to use 21st century writing tools. I would say pre-COVID, this was an area that we all kind of felt uncomfortable with. I know I did. I was using some, but I knew I needed to improve. And I think that was one thing that's come out of the pandemic, is we all feel so much more comfortable with using, digital platforms for various parts of our teaching. But the experts tell us that, things like blogs and wikis and Google Docs and Google Forms and slides and various apps are all things that can help writers. They also say that teaching handwriting and the use of digital tools like a Chromebook simultaneously are important. So the Chromebook, with young kids that are learning to write, they can learn both at the same time. But it is important to emphasize handwriting. Certainly some kids struggle with it, and we need to use assistive technology for those students. But I did link in the Wakelet collection an important article that Dr. Graham wrote about making sure that handwriting doesn't take a backseat, that we do need to teach kids to be proficient with that, but also teach them how to do things like use word processing. Here's a great resource, again, linked to in my Wakelet collection. This site gives examples of websites and tools for each of these categories. So it provides links for places you can go to help kids with digital storytelling, comic strip tools, mind mapping tools, story starters, writing mechanics that focus on both grammar and style, graphic organizers, and publishing. So those might be some helpful resources for you. I will say Wakelet, if you're not familiar with it, is an excellent resource to use when kids are doing research to gather their resources, so they can go out and do their research on the web and sort of pin those things in their Wakelet collection, and then use those as, reading material to help them do their research. And it's multimedia too, so it can be videos, it can be podcasts, it can be articles. It might be a useful tool, a 21st century tool to help writers. If you're interested in digging a little bit more into the research, I also put in my Wakelet collection this great 23-minute video. It's a presentation by Dr. Steve Graham, where he really talks about the research and how it supports increasing writing instruction or improving writing instruction. So if you do want to look at the research a little more closely, do check that out. Okay, so what's next? In the Digging Deeper sessions, I kind of talked about it throughout the presentation. We are going to be looking more closely if you come to those follow-up sessions and check the PDS website for dates, times, and links. Mentor texts and models, like the visual rubric that I shared. More about reading, writing connections, in particular, the reader response notebook. And then more specific writing strategies like kernel essays that I shared with you. I have other ones that I'd love to share as well. So I do invite you to come back and attend those sessions. All right, so we're going to pause. And if you have any thoughts or questions about what I shared today, You can put those in the chat. I probably won't be able to address every question, but I'll kind of scan through, and it will also help inform my follow-up sessions. You can also email me at georgepd@buffalostate.edu with any questions that you have. And one more time, I just want to make sure that you grab that Wakelet collection link so that you can have access to everything that was shared today. Thanks, Kelsey. You're welcome. Hopefully everybody's walking away with one or two tools to add to your toolbox.
Patty, one thing I hear teachers and new teachers say is about the amount of time that it takes for writing, and also the time that it takes for feedback on writing. And I think that that's an issue that maybe dissuades people from integrating writing more often. Do you have some thoughts about the issue of time?
I do think that's one of the reasons, I do hear teachers say that too. I don't have time to fit it in. I've got this literacy block, but Dr. Graham talks about how the literacy block, a typical literacy block, maybe in an elementary classroom would be maybe 90 minutes, where he says that as much as possible, try to integrate reading and writing. So, having kids read something and then using the response log is particularly helpful in a way to link the two together. And then just interspersing it in the content areas is really critical too. But small changes, even increasing it to 45 more minutes a week than what you're already doing, is really only 15 minutes, 3 days a week. So I think when you think of it in those terms, that makes it maybe a little bit more doable. I hear that a lot, but what I would say is it's really valuable time because it's that context to strengthen all of those big literacy areas. So it's so critically important. And I think the payoff is big when you invest the time in the writing instruction. The feedback is tough too. I wanted to make sure I did address that. I think some of these digital tools that we have, if you can't quote unquote get to every kid in the physical space, now we have all these like virtual spaces that we can maybe record something later and share the link to the child with the child, to provide feedback and help us be a little bit more efficient with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts or questions? Once again, many, many thanks for taking time out of your busy afternoon to join me. And I do hope to see you again at our follow-up sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and please, the all hands on deck. There's multiple follow-up sessions. So this is really exciting that we'll be able to sustain the professional development throughout the semester. I've placed the evaluation link in the chat, so we'd love to hear your feedback, and we really appreciate you joining today.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.